Hi everyone, today I'm going to be making the new jelly bean elephant that was released last Friday by Kelly, and I'm going to show you also a hack to make it double-sided so we have two ears and the eyes on both sides. If you just want to make it the one-sided, that's awesome too. It's super cute and you can just skip the doubling steps. So the first step would be to load your hoop 1 onto the embroidery machine, which I have done. I also have all my materials prepped and ready, so I have a little bit of yarn to use as the elephant tail end, and then I'm using this really pretty floral as the ear accent color, and I match my yarn to that, and then I'm going to do a pretty pink minky. I have heavy tearaway, which is what I use pretty much all the time. It will depend just as much on your material as the design. This is a really light design. There's not a lot of stitching, but if you have a super stretchy fabric or really thin cotton, you may need to give it some fusible stabilizer to help control that stretch, or just give it the extra stability that a thinner fabric is going to need. I'm also going to need some water-soluble stabilizer topper. So this is just the thin plasticky kind, and I use that anytime I'm using a fabric with a pile like Minky. So I have the hoop 1 saved and put on my machine, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch out step 1 directly onto the stabilizer. So I've gone ahead and stitched step 1, which will show me where my ear and my tail is, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch step 2, which will show me where to put my yarn for my little tail end on the elephant. Okay, so I've gone ahead and stitched a small little placement there for the end of the tail. I'm going to use yarn, and I'm going to tape it down so that the part I want out is facing below the tail. This is a felty style tail because it's so thin it's unable to be turned, so we want it faced out instead of in like a normal limb. And then I'm also going to use a little bit of water soluble stabilizer, just a scrap from another project, over top of that. Yarn obviously has different strands, and the water soluble will help it not get caught up under your foot and end up with broken needles. Now that I have that tacked down, I removed a little bit of the excess at the top and any that wasn't caught in the download, or the tack down, sorry. And I'm going to add my tail fabric. So this is felty style, which means you're, instead of adding things right side together like you would on a turned item, you're going to put something underneath the hoop and something on top of the hoop, both facing out. So for the tail, if you want it to be a little stiffer and you're using your matching fabric, I just add a little piece of felt on top, and then I add the fabric that I want showing on top. And then I'm also going to slide underneath the hoop, facing outward, so down the nice side. You can take your hoop off and tape if you prefer. You can double check by taking your top off and making sure that you have everything covered on the back. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to stitch step 4, which is going to finish off your tail. You can add some water soluble on top as well. Again, I just tend to use scraps off of other projects for any little pieces like this, and that will help control your fur. So once you finish step 4, you now have your tail. So I have my soft minky on the top. If I flip it over, that's what the back looks like. You can match your bobbin thread, but mine was white, so I figured with the fur it wouldn't show enough to bother, so I didn't, but you can match if it's a darker color. And we're ready to move on to the ear. Make sure when you're cutting out your tail that you don't cut away your little fringe. So cut the top portion, the back portion separately. So we're moving on to step 5 of hoop 1, and we are going to do the ear portion. Again, if you want some stability, anytime I'm not using a limb to be stuffed, I typically use a layer of felt to give it a little bit of structure, and I lay that right on the hoop. And then I'm going to take my printed fabric and lay it down. Now, if you wanted to add a name to the ear, this would be the point that you could do it. I might even use if you're not using a basting spread, probably use that initial tack down, or placement, sorry, to tack that down to give it so your fabric doesn't stuff in. So you want to secure that some way, either by a basting stitch or by the placement stitch if you're going to add a name. And then I'm going to take my minky fabric and I'm going to lay it down face down. So we've got the back of the ear and the front of the ear facing each other, and then I have my optional layer of felt in there as well. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch step 5. So I'm all done of hoop 1. I have my tail and my ear, and I'm going to cut those out. Careful not to cut the little tail end off and cutting out the tail, and I'm going to turn the ears around so they're right side out. So I'm going to go through the optional steps for making it double-sided now. So if you are not wanting to make it double-sided, you can skip this portion all the way up until we start the second hoop the second time. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the placement for the ear. You can do it in a new hoop, or I had extra room in this larger hoop, so I'm just going to do it above where I had done the original. I'm going to have to stop my placement before my tail because I don't need 2 tails. So I'm just going to stitch the first part of step 1, and then I am going to stop it before it jumps to the tail. Okay, so I have gone ahead and stitched the step 1 placement, stopped it when it jumped to the tail, and I'm going to go ahead and skip steps 2, 3, and 4 on that hoop because they're all the tail, and I'm going to jump right to step number 5. Again, I'm going to put felt to give the ear a little stability so it isn't floppy. I'm going to add my pretty pink flowered fabric on top. And then I'm going to add my ear fabric face down so we have right sides together. Make sure that whole placement is covered, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch step 5 again. Okay, so I have got my 2 ears for both sides. Again, this is optional if you want to do double-sided. So, and then we have the 1 tail. So I'm going to cut those out, and I'm going to go on to the back side of my elephant. So I've got my tail, careful not to cut the yarn, and my 2 ears. If you're just doing one side, you'll only need 1. And I've cut them out. Because I used a cotton woven, I'm going to run a zigzag around my sewing machine. If you don't want to do that, I would use some sort of heat bond light, or use a non-woven, or you can cut your seam allowances a little bit wider than I have here to make sure that that fabric doesn't pull away. So I've gone ahead and added a zigzag stitch around the edge, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn this. You can use a turning tool if you like, but these are pretty big so they're easy to manipulate. I'm going to run a zigzag down here as well to prevent that from fraying, but I may choose to do a fold, which I really like the folded look, but on the side profile I'm not sure if it'll look right, so I'm just going to wait till I get to that point to do that. Okay, so the biggest thing with doing a 2-sided is you're going to have to mirror your back side. So I am more comfortable in software, so I just did it on my software. I believe my PE 770 has a function to do it online. or on the machine. And I think most probably do. I believe Welcome True Sizer might do it for free if you don't have software to do it, but I can't say that for sure, but I think so. So it doesn't really matter which one you start with, but I'm going to start with the one that I actually did mirror. I believe that's it. And load that in. So I've gone ahead and loaded my mirrored elephant body in. Again, if you just want to do one-sided, you can completely skip this hoop. I'm going to lay down my fabric on my hoop. And because I'm using a really furry minky, I'm going to use some water soluble on top. Now the first step is a placement, and we initially would do that on the fabric directly, which I will for the front hoop. But for this one where we're going to be lining it up, I don't want to have to be that precise. So I'm going to use a basting box. My machine has a feature right on there. If yours doesn't, there are tons of free ones out there. You can add in your software. You can use pins. You can use basting spray, but you want something that's going to prevent the eye stitching and the satin stitch on the ear from getting sucked into the hoop. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch a basting stitch around my fabric. Okay, so I've gone ahead and stitched a basting stitch around the outer portion of the elephant, and I'm just going to skip step 1 in lieu of this and go right to step 2, which is the optional eyelashes. If you want a less feminine looking elephant, or you just don't care for eyelashes, then you can just skip that step 2 as well. But I have a pretty pink one and I'd like to add some pretty eyelashes. So I've done her cute little eyelashes, and I'm going to proceed now on to step 3, 4, and 5, which is going to do the black of the eye, the outside of the eye, and the little white sparkles in the eye. So I've gone ahead and stitched the 3, 4, and 5, which was the black of the eye, the color around the eye, and then the little white sparkles. You get such a little cute heart sparkle. And I'm moving on to step 6, which is just going to be a line to show me exactly where to place my elephant ear on the side. So I've gone ahead and stitched that line that shows me where my ear is going to be placed. I've decided that I'm going to try it folded, so I've just taken the top, maybe less than a third, maybe a quarter of the ear, and folded it down. And I used a zigzag on my sewing machine to secure. You can use pins or tape. That's really your choice, or you can freehand it if you like. I just like the stability of a sewing machine stitch, and it's easy for me. So make sure if you're doing 2 sides that you mirror your ears. You don't want them to be the same because they're going to be on opposite sides. So they have to be mirrored just like your front. So you're going to go ahead and place your ear so that your line, so it's over the line, and it's going to tack that down. We're treating it just like an applique. So it's going to tack down. We're going to trim the excess away, and then it'll satin stitch over top of that. You can use a layer of your water soluble over top of that line, which will help it not get caught up. It will help it not get stuck in the fur or the bulk, and that's a huge lifesaver in these projects. So it's gone ahead and tacked that down. Now we want to trim this excess as close as we can, so that that will all be there, gone, and that the raw edges are going to be hidden under this satin stitch. These are my favorites for trimming appliques, but I'm sure everybody has their favorites, but double angled are what they're called, and I like them the best. So we've gone ahead and trimmed that as closely as I could there. And I'm going to go ahead and run the next step, which is step 8, satin stitch. And again, my best friend, water soluble. And again, I'm just using scraps that I pulled off of other projects. Okay, so I finished the satin stitch along the edge of the elephant and my ear is nice and secure. This is our back side, so I'm not going to run the final outline for this one. I'm done for the back side and I'm just going to save that to use on my next hoop. I'm going to have to reload the unmirrored version, so if we did the same one we'd have the same sides and that wouldn't work out. So we're going to go ahead and delete that one that was facing down and go ahead and load the other one that the trunk is facing up. So they should be opposite, so that way when we lay down our other hoop on top, it will match up with it. So we have the eye up here where the eye is and the ear where the ear is. So we go ahead and load that. Okay, so we've got our hoop 2 like normal. If you are wanting to not do double-sided, this would be where you start again after I told you to skip. So this is just the regular hoop 2 that comes with the file. So I have Minky and I'm laying my water soluble down and my heavy tearaway in the hoop, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch the placement step directly on to my fabric to secure my fabric onto my stabilizer. You can use a basting stitch, you can use basting spray, but this is my preferred method. So I've gone ahead and used the placement to tack my fabric down in place. I am going to go ahead and stitch step 2, which is the eyelashes step. Again, this is optional, so if you prefer not to have eyelashes, you can just skip it. Step 3 will be the black of the eye. Step 4 is the colored area around the eye, and step 5 is the white of the eye. Okay, so we've gone ahead and done the eyelashes, the black of the eye, the colored ring, and the white of the eye, and we're going to move on to step 6. It's going to stitch us a placement line that's going to show us where to put our ear again for this side. Okay, so we have our placement lined there, and I decided to go ahead and fold my ears like I showed on the other side. I'm going to fold it down from the top about 1/4 inch or 1/4 of the length, and I zigzagged it there just to secure it, but you can pin or tape. And I'm going to place that ear over the placement line and it's going to tack down. I'm going to use a scrap of water soluble stabilizer over top to help keep the foot from getting attached in that fur. Okay, so I've gone ahead and tacked that down, and I'm going to treat it like an applique, and I'm going to trim as closely to those stitches. Again, I'm going to be using my double angled applique scissors, but you can use whatever is your favorite. So I've gone ahead and trimmed as closely as I could there, and I'm going to go ahead and add another layer of water soluble on top of that. I'm getting near the end of my scrap, so I'll have to grab something else. And run the satin stitch. So we gone ahead and attached our ear, and we have it securely in there. And now we're going to move on to the next step, which is going to be the placement of our tail for our elephant. So it's gone ahead and showed us where we need to place our tail. We're going to place it down so that the raw edge is outside. You want the side that you want facing the front of the design to be face down. This guy is the same both ways, so it doesn't matter, but if you chose to do different colors for whatever reason, maybe you're doing a double-sided elephant, you can match the back. So right sides together, and then we're going to tack down that tail. You can use tape to put it in place, but I tend to just freehand it. Alright, so we're on our last step. So we're going to be adding our backing. So you want to make sure that none of your limbs are over top of your final outlines. So we just want to tape our ear and our tail in. You can use tape. I use painter's tape, masking tape. I know people use washi tape, if that's how you say it. And then if you were not doing double-sided, you just add a plain layer on the back and it would just be plain, and you would just lay it face together. Because I'm doing the double-sided, I'm taking my back I prepared and I'm going to lay it right sides together. And you're also going to tape this ear out of the way as well. So you don't want that to get stuck inside our elephant. And you're going to lay that right down on top, and you're going to try and line up your satin stitch and your eye as best as you can with the other side of the hoop. So I've done the best job I can lining it up there. I've got a little bulk. I like to sort of help along the final outline, but you can use pins or tapes if you're uncomfortable with that. My fingers are nowhere near the needle. It may look that way on the stitch out though. So I've gone ahead and lined it up the best that I could on the final outline. You can even see where my basting stitch is a little off, so I'm not exactly right, and the bulk helps, or like sort of pulls it in a bit. So it's good to give yourself a little extra around the edge just to be sure that you have enough. And I will get it out of the hoop and cut it out and turn around and stuff it. Gone ahead and unhooped it and cut it out. I leave myself a little extra at the opening hole. I tore away the majority of the stabilizer, but you don't need to get it all. If you have any curves like these, I would suggest slicing in perpendicularly. Just careful not to cut your stitches, but just in, it'll help give that curve a better curve. And you definitely don't want any excess on your trunk or your feet, or they'll be difficult to turn. I pulled out the basting stitch for the backing because it's super easy to just cut the four corners is what I do, and then yank the thread out, and that takes care of anything that might have overlapped so we don't see it on the other side. So for the trunk, if you find it hard to get your fingers in there, you can use just a dowel, or people use chopsticks, I think, and just work your way into the nose. And just keep pulling out and pushing in to get the fabric worked through and up that curve. When you get to the end. And then we have our super cute elephant that's double-sided, and we just gotta get her stuffed up.